We've talked a lot about supply chain contracts and some of the components. We're going to now look at some additional components we call limitations. So they really play a major role because a lot of times there's things like buyback contracts. In our case, we have in academia, we have a bookstore. Okay, the bookstore is sitting down. They're going to go out and buy X number of books to make certain that all the students have this textbook on their shelf. If an instructor flips over in the last second they want to change textbooks, it's a disaster for the bookstore, except almost every single bookstore will have a buyback contract. So I got a contract with this book publisher over here. If I don't sell these textbooks over here, textbooks are heavy, they're thick, there's a lot of money tied up in that whole aspect in capital. And a lot of times there's this contract that if I don't buy this, you get to buy it back and refund me all the money that I paid for the book. Now you have problems though. Let's say that you're in an edition number 12. Okay. And so all of a sudden the company flips over into edition number 13 and the bookstore is selling out of 12. Okay. Then they get the 12 back and there's 30 of them sitting there and they cost X number of dollars. Should the company sit down and receive them? That's going to be defined in your buyback contract. So all these details are in there. And if they aren't, then you're going to be stuck in the aspect of thinking about, gee, I wish I had it in there. So then you have another deal. You're selling two products that compete against each other. Some have a buyback option and some don't. Think about that for a second. Over here, a company is giving you a buyback option, so they're treating you pretty well that you're taking no risk. The other one is not giving you one. And which one do you sell? You tend to sell this one over here because here you have the guarantee and here you don't. So all of a sudden, the one that you have a better partnership with, you cheat because you're pushing this one over here. So by the time you're done, you almost have to sit down and find out what the other person is doing. And then if you're a smart player, you don't tell them and everything in the process. You have that retail issue as to competing products, exactly what's going to happen. And if you're the one high and dry that you have the product sitting on your inventory because you didn't have a clever contract, that's an issue. Revenue sharing contracts require the supplier to monitor the buyer's revenue. And so you sit down and pay attention to all that aspect of it. In revenue sharing, the buyers have an incentive to push competing products with higher profit margins. So you have that aspect of it because everybody is out to make more profit. That's the nature of business. So make certain that people are not undercutting you because you're being too generous. And make certain that you have people out there watching out for your interest because this is hopefully a long-term interest. But sometimes people don't care because there's an entire world out there, people trying to make a profit in the world of business. So we assume the supplier has a made-to-order supply chain, but sometimes you have to build it up. So you do different things to build it up, and you want to enable risk sharing. And sometimes you want to reduce the manufacturer's risk. So do you focus in on one manufacturer, one supplier? Do you have multiple manufacturers? These are questions as to what you want to do in the process. So here's a couple of tools. Payback contracts. The buyer agrees to pay some agreed upon price for any unit produced, okay, but not purchased by the distributor. Okay, so sometimes you want to have that insurance. Okay, and the insurance is a payback contract. They're producing this over here, but you never use it, but you have that insurance policy sitting over there. Now, what if it's a non-durable good? What if it's a good that will sit down there and ferment and rot on the shelf if it doesn't happen? Well, that's a different issue, and that should be addressed depending upon the good, and that'll be part of that dialogue in actually trying to do the payback contract. A cost sharing contract. The buyer shares some production costs with the manufacturer in return for a discount on the wholesale price. Now, listen, when it comes to manufacturing, okay, if you look as to what it takes to build something, sometimes you have to sit down and build an entire assembly line. And if you want to have somebody do that for you and make certain that you have access to a certain amount of inventory, it may be that you have to supplement their capital and then get a guarantee that you have access to as many as you want in the process. That's called the cost sharing contract. It's common, it's used on a regular basis, but you have to sit down and they're all big players in the process. The small player can't sit down and start subsidizing the big manufacturer, but watch the aspect of it as so you can benefit by having a guarantee and making certain that your store, your retail, your supply chain is not damaged in the process. A lot of times we make the assumption here that so far the buyer and the supplier, they share the same demand forecast. Sometimes they don't. So you have, we call that asymmetric information. One thinks the market's going to do this, and one thinks the market's going to do this. So you're sitting here having this dialogue over here. So what do you need to do with it? Sometimes you're going to sit down and have a capacity based on a forecast where the buyer has an incentive to inflate its forecast to match yours in the process. So that being said, what do? Do you cut the price? You sit down there and give an incentive to buy more of your product? Then so you have to sit down and think about the different aspects as to what is good for you and how you can sit down and increase overall your profit margin. Capacity reservation. Sometimes you pay a fee to say, I want to be number one, number one, number one. If that's the case, you might have to pay for it. Okay. Sometimes you do an advanced purchase contract. That happens an awful lot in retail, especially because remember that on a 12-month calendar, 3 months on a regular retail calendar, that they sell 40% of the goods. So you'll see those contracts are forming in April, May, and the late ones in June. And all of a sudden, the merchandise starts arriving in September, and boom, you're looking at September, October, November, December, you're struggling. So you have the advanced purchase to make sure you have access to that product and nobody else does, or if they do, they're secondary to you. So advanced purchase contracts. A lot of times we love the long-term contract. It's so stable, so consistent, but sometimes you're looking for some type of non-strategic components. You can shift things on a regular basis. So the benefit of long-term is it's comfortable. The worst part of long-term, it's too comfortable and you lose your edge, and you might not be able to take advantages of other non-strategic components to buy. And somebody comes along and all of a sudden now they have this component over here 50% cheaper than your current contract. You might have a problem over here because somebody else may grab that and you lose the benefit and they make more profit than you. So it depends what you're doing. And sometimes you want to sit down and have a whole series of a variety of suppliers. If you have 5 suppliers providing basically the same type of components, okay, that way you can sit down. If everything gets busy, you ask them all to kick it up, and they can all probably do that without much problem. But if it all goes down, you wipe out 2 of them, and all of a sudden you got 3 contractors instead of 5. So it gives you a lot of flexibility by having a multitude of suppliers giving you similar, or if not exactly the same type of product. When you look on different aspects of risk, the buyers can reduce supply costs and be more responsible to market conditions. But the risks include the inventory risk due to uncertain demand. Sometimes demand, no matter how well you forecast, you already know the number one rule of forecasting is the forecast is wrong. Okay, you already know that. But that being said, the risk are financial due to a volatile market price, and we've gone through lots of that. But we will all the time go through that, and sometimes there's a shortage. Long-term contracts, you want to sit down, specify a fixed amount to be delivered in the future. That is really good. Everybody talks about it. You agree on the price and the quantity. You also have flexible or option contract where the buyer prepays a small fraction of the price, really to make certain that they have access to the inventory they know they're going to need. And then sometimes you want to buy stuff right there in the spot. Okay, for additional supply in the open market. A lot of times a spot purchase is a lot cheaper and happens occasionally, and you can't count on them. And then sometimes you do that whole thing with the multiple contracts at the same time to optimize profit and really reduce risk between both the manufacturers and the supplier in the process. A lot of limitations out there, and you can put them into your contract and make certain that you're going to optimize your supply chain. The buyback, it has some serious incentives to it. Look at revenue sharing. Everybody should maximize their profits for the retailer, supplier, manufacturer, and then everybody wants to find ways to reduce their excess inventory, because at the end of the day, no inventory is always good, except if you don't have any safety stock and you're in trouble anyway. But that being said, contract limitations, there's a lot of ways to sit down and write these things. Sometimes experience, and sometimes boilerplate stuff sitting on the shelf, and sometimes good, solid, practical experience will help you have a successful supply chain. Take care.